Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So, on today's episode, we are celebrating number 200.
200 episodes. How crazy is that?
I know. So when we first started, neither one of us wanted to record a short season and then suddenly stop, I'm sure you've all heard those. There's like 5 episodes and then it's gone. And you were like, but it was so good. So we were like, we're going to commit to this thing for the long haul. There's so much we want to share about our artistic journeys, the insight that's been generally shared by others to us that we want to share forward, of course. And then we just decided we had to make a serious commitment to the podcast. So going back to the beginning, back in 2019, when we met, if you haven't heard the story yet, we met in an art critique in downtown Raleigh, quickly found common ground. We were out in the cold for hours still talking because it was like, what about this? Me too, me too, me too. It was like
I know, it
it
was
was a lot
so
of that.
cold that day too. It was so
I
cold.
know, I know. Frozen fingers, but we were like all smiles and laughter. So even though of course we come from very different backgrounds, cultures, educational paths, if you will, we quickly realized that we were both aiming to figure out how to be successful artists. And in the spirit of community over competition, we just started exchanging ideas and leveraging our strengths to help each other, and then of course eventually to help others too.
Yeah, and it really has been such a fun journey. I mean, over not just the past 200 episodes, but also everything that we've shared on the podcast and just obviously you and I together in the past, what, almost 6 years now, which is crazy.
It's been a
Um,
while.
but yeah, it's been so fun, even especially having the podcast to like document that whole journey too, right? Which I think was part of having the podcast that I didn't really think about, but it's something that I really value is documenting these conversations that we're having with fellow artists of tips and tricks and advice that we can not only selfishly benefit from ourselves in our own creative journey, but also share forward with other artists too. Obviously, there were the logistics of trying to figure out the platform, what technology we were going to use, the episode structure, and all of that in the beginning. But after launching, it was what, May 4th? I do remember that. It was Star Wars Day
Yes, Star
in
Wars Day.
2021. Originally by the name Art Studio Insights, we then evolved it to Level Up Artists. It's just been so much fun. Obviously we committed in the beginning to doing 100 episodes, and I vividly remember that conversation of you and me sitting in my studio. It was like peak COVID time, and you were like, "I have this idea. We should totally do a podcast." And I was like, "I'll do it, but only if we
Yeah.
do at least 100 episodes." Like, and now we're at 200, which is crazy. We've interviewed over 65 artists, curators, authors, art professionals, which is amazing because we weren't even sure if we were going to do interviews in the beginning. Or I think in the beginning we thought like maybe one day like that'll be next level. And honestly, we've had such pivotal people on our podcast too in terms of authors that whose books that we've loved, artists that we look up to, building a network with curators. It's just been so much fun. So I'm glad that we took the leap of faith and did it years ago because it's been such a fun journey. And now we're at 200 episodes, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I'm glad too that those first few interviews that we did, the artists we interviewed were so gracious and patient with us
Yeah.
as we were like figuring out like what would it look like if we added a third person to the conversation and the screen and the technology. So thank you all, of course, for being so kind and gentle with us and helping us
Yeah.
figure it out, being our guinea pigs, if you will. But it's definitely interesting how all these episodes episodes later, our podcast mission and pillars remain the same. We want to connect with others, we want to share it forward, and we definitely want to demystify the creative process and say no to the whole like, oh, mysterious artist working in the basement that doesn't talk to anybody and like art just comes out magically. It's like, no, there's a lot involved. So we've always wanted to kind of pull the curtain and look and share it. And then over the 200 episodes, so we've created thousands of minutes of content. We've had thousands of downloads. Thank you, everybody. We even made it to the top 10% of video podcasts on Spotify. So that one was a surprise, since we embraced doing the video format pretty early on. So that
Hmm.
helped us out. We have listeners from all over the world. Our biggest three geographical groups are the US, Canada, and Australia, all the way on the other end. Hey, what's up, guys? And in terms of where, folks listen to the most, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. So definitely various options to consume, whether you are watching us as we're talking and interviewing folks, or you are just, have the headphones on while you're painting or, carving or sculpting or whatever your medium is, or maybe you're just in the car, traveling and listening to us. So regardless of how you consume the Level Up Artist podcast, we are super grateful.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being along this journey, being with us every week. And we want to do something a little bit special to celebrate. So in honor of 200 episodes, we wanted to take it all the way back to episode number 2. Get it? 200, 2. Perfect connection. And that episode is Create Before You Consume, which honestly, it's a super quick episode, but the content is still so true even 4 years later. Um, I'm really excited for you guys to flash back to a time with us, be understanding that we are also still figuring out the cadence of podcasting. So it was fun for both of us to listen back to it, and we hope you guys enjoy it too.
Absolutely. And this was the version you guys are going to listen to. It's the second version that we recorded. The first version, it was Jackie's sofa in her apartment, and we couldn't even figure out how to look at the screen versus look at each other. So it would be
Yep.
like this funny back and forth of like I would look at her, but then I would be looking at her shoulder randomly while she's looking at the screen. It was like this awkward dance. It was hilarious.
No one
But
will
then
ever see
version
that
number two,
footage.
yeah, never to be seen, never to be seen. You'll only hear legends of this ridiculous first version. But once we did the second one, we already had a little bit of a better idea of like, oh, if we do it in Zoom, we're both facing the same direction. Or even if we do it in person, we're still facing the camera in the same direction,
Yeah.
without turning our heads and our bodies like left and right. It was that first one was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But we did want to share this with you. And also, fun fact, even after all these years and all these episodes, create before you consume keeps coming up as one of the most listened to episodes every year, which
Yeah.
is extremely interesting. And like, okay, thank you all for still listening to us after listening to this very first or second, technically, version of what we created. So thank you for that. So truly a testament to show that no matter where you are in your business or where we are, some of these ideas are still great reminders to avoid overwhelm, stay focused, move our art careers forward. So with that, we hope you enjoyed this flashback episode. Create before you consume.
We are so, so excited for everyone to be listening and to go on this journey with us. First topic, Adriana, what do we got?
We are going to be talking about the maxim behind create before you consume and how it applies to, well, artists, regardless of your discipline.
All right. So diving right in, my first interpretation of that topic, of course, is first thing in the morning. I felt like I have been very intentional lately, not always successful with it, but first thing when you wake up, like everyone knows about the scroll in the morning.
Oh, the infinite
Social
scroll.
media, every type of media, creative output of others, influence is right at your fingertips. from TikTok to Instagram to Pinterest to Facebook. And then by that point, you go back to TikTok, back to Instagram, and just keep doing the cycle.
That's if you leave any of them.
That's fair.
You might get stuck too. And it's like first thing in the morning, you wake up and you see the notifications and it'll say, oh, you know, somebody liked your post or left a comment, and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to check it out real quick right before I brush my teeth. And before you know it, 3 hours later.
Even like 20 minutes later, though, like having that be like the first thing on your mind can be so difficult.
It is. And it's one of those things too, where it's like, when you look at it, it could be inspiring depending what you're looking at.
Yeah.
It might be something where like somebody left a nice comment, something encouraging, something you're working on, someone's networking with you, someone you were, you know, trying to get a hold of. But what about those times when it's kind of on the negative side of things and it just kind of derails the rest of your day?
Right. And even if it's not negative, but there's just like so much noise out there. And I think everyone knows that. If you're like, okay, I just scrolled for 10 minutes, you're like, what benefit did I get from this?
Exactly.
It's terrible.
And then not only that, it's like if you got stuck looking, say, at, you know, an artist that's more successful, maybe at a higher level than you know, imposter syndrome kicks in and we all forget about, you know, I've heard it called the overnight 10-year success. You know, you're like, oh, but this person is so famous, I'll never be like them. And it's like, well, they might be blowing up now, but they've been working on their craft for over 10 years.
Right.
It just, but then you kind of forget, and you're like, oh, will I ever be like them? I don't think I'll ever level up enough. And then it just kind of brings you down, and then you try to show up to your studio practice, and you're just bummed.
Right. And I feel like it goes in every type of comparison game way, whether it's, okay, creative creation, that's a time to say
we're just gonna roll with that.
Yeah. Whether it's like creative output, whether it's creative ideas, but I mean, even just from your own mental sanity too. I mean, creating before you consume, in terms of like, we are all aware, like we only have a certain amount of energy during the day. So like, all right, the amount of energy that you're putting into just consuming someone else's work is then draining from the attention that you can have on your own craft. So even if you're not playing the comparison game, even if you're just the ultimate fangirl, which I feel like every time I'm on social media, I'm just like hyping everyone up. I'm like the ultimate cheerleader for other people.
Absolutely.
But then it's like, I just put all this energy into others, and you have to remember to like put that back into yourself and back into your work.
And
too.
if you drain it,
right,
then what's left?
Exactly.
So let's discuss, how do we get around that? How do we, you know,
create before you consume.
What do we create? Let's discuss.
Anything and everything. So I felt like, for me, really deciding, I forget where I heard the quote, and hopefully someone can remind me if you've also read similar books, but they said somewhere where basically make sure that the first thing that you do during the day is think your own thoughts.
I like that.
And that was one of the things for me that really made me, because everyone knows like, it's not great to scroll social media first thing when you wake up. Like, you know, you want to like have your own creative energy, but I used to do it every day anyway. And so really thinking, okay, am I thinking my true, genuine thoughts first thing in the morning, or am I just letting myself be consumed by others and letting other people dictate my mind, essentially, like hijacking your thoughts before you even realize it?
And set the tone for your day. And
right.
Just, again, if it's positive, maybe it's not so terrible, but a lot of times it's just bad.
Yeah.
It's not really what you're going for. So another solution that I found for that, and obviously you can find a multitude of books on this, and we're not going to go down the rabbit hole. Not today.
Not today. We both have very full bookshelves that we will definitely dive into in the future.
Oh, we definitely will.
So many.
Yeah, no, bookworms unite. Yes. But essentially, one of the other things, you know, it's basically to try to create a morning routine. And there's a variety of things, and we'll definitely make an episode all about routines.
The morning routine.
Oh my God. I mean, they're helpful. But one of them, for example, is even if you're like, well, I don't know that I have enough time, you know, to create. I have a full-time job. I have kids. I have like all these other competing responsibilities. Yeah. Well, you can wake up a couple minutes earlier. This is something almost anybody can do. And just say, even if it's just 10 minutes,
Yeah.
you just bring out a journal. I mean, a recommendation I give a lot of our visitors at the studio, I say, have a journal, just basic journal. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Sitting on your night table and a pen. Wake up in the middle of the night or whenever you wake up in the morning, you have all these ideas flowing. Just scribble them down. You know, it doesn't have to be legible, doesn't have to be great, doesn't have to be shareable.
Right.
Maybe it's a doodle, maybe it's a sketch.
Maybe it's even just like a phrase that you might want to use for a title or an idea or like
a song title.
A song title.
A song stuck in your head. That happens.
I think there's the thing too, like it doesn't even have to be necessarily the medium that you work in. Like obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously. I know one of us has been known to have paints right next to their bed, but that's another story for another time. But even having for me, like writing is such a big part of my painting process. And so it doesn't even have to be like the medium that you think you work in, but it might be, an idea or a poem or a thought or like some crazy dream that you're like, I want to remember this.
Yeah.
And just putting it down because those pure thoughts are really where you need to get back to once you're in the creative mode to like harness and utilize and develop them.
Exactly. And a lot of times what will happen is, I mean, it can be as simple as a bulletized list of things that are kind of stuck in your head and you just want to dump them on paper.
A brain download.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just let it go. Maybe it's, I have to pick up someone. I have to do laundry. I have to do this. That's fine. Let it all go. Let some of those thoughts, make their way into paper, unclutter your brain essentially. And that way, when you're ready to create, whether it's in the morning or later on, and you just want to kind of expand your practice, you don't have all these, nagging thoughts also floating around in your head, distracting you from, oh, wait, actually, I can pause this. Maybe instead of binge watching, guilty as charged, of course, binge watching too many Netflix episodes, right? Maybe you say like, okay, I'm going to watch one less episode. We're not asking you to sacrifice too much, people. Maybe I'm going to watch baby steps. One less episode, if morning doesn't work, maybe I do it in the evening. And I'm just going to doodle. I'm just going to watch, even if it's just a YouTube video of somebody else doing something creative. Yeah. I'm going to read a book on the creative practice or, I don't know, drawing, anything that kind of builds into your creative practice. But most importantly is to start it in the day, if possible, before you get on your phone. Just do something.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the idea of like taking it off the screen too. I mean,
yes,
social media and connecting with other people has so many benefits. But one thing, I mean, as so many of us know, like first thing in the morning or right before you go to bed, like that screen light, both from like your mental health standpoint, even just like keeping you alert at night can be really counteractive to like trying to go to sleep, but also like having a notebook and pen rather than the notes app. Because I used to do that too. Like I used to just like write in my notes app, but then I'd think of something, write it, have a flash of blue light in your face, and then put it down.
And a notification
5 minutes
might come up.
Right.
In the middle
like,
of
oh, let me just check this email. Oh, let me just check this. And it's like, no, like cutting it all off.
Exactly. One thing that I've been doing on mine, I'm just going to share with you all, depending what type of phone you have, you might want to Google how to do this. But one thing I've been doing with mine, which has been working out pretty well so far.
Yeah.
It's essentially, there's a setting on the phone where you can limit your screen. So what I'll do is like, I might be in the morning, I might create something, on paper and pen, but then I'll go to social media and like keep up. I've made friendships with folks that are in other countries. So they're going to bed when I'm waking up kind of thing. So I'll just say hi, etc. But before the infinite scroll can grab a hold of my attention for hours on end, there's a setting on my phone where for about an hour, it actually locks me out. Yes, you can override it, but still, that's not the point.
You have to consciously choose
to override
it, which then it goes into like the internal debate of like, all right, am I choosing this? I think even just that awareness is huge too.
Yeah, and
because sometimes you just want to be on your phone, or like you actually are doing something productive.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, great.
Exactly. So instead of getting carried away, the phone actually will shut the screen. Yes, you can override it, like I said, but it will shut the screen for about an hour in the morning. I think I have it set from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And that forces me to actually look away from the screen, go look at something else, grab a sketchbook, do some doodles, like I said, do some brain downloads, etc. So if I started that earlier in the morning, then social media derailed me. That's an opportunity to cut that back again and then go back into analog mode, if you will, before going back digital, if that makes sense. But at least that is a way to kind of pause it. And depending what kind of phone, you might have a setting similar to that. Or maybe you have the discipline for it.
That's true. I feel like I've definitely weaned myself off. I can't say I did it like cold turkey and I'm not like perfect, but yeah, definitely the past couple months, I feel like I'm definitely more of like a discipline. More so, I just don't know how to use technology that well. So having all these alarms and restrictions, I was like, I'll just put my phone in the other room and make sure it's loud enough to where my alarm will wake me up.
I know you said that, and it's like TikTok has the setting where you can have a log after an hour. Godsend. I mean, it's a beautiful
TikTok,
setting.
the app itself?
Yes, it does.
No way.
Yes, it does. So after an hour.
That's crazy.
Yep, after an hour on the app, it can actually lock the screen and it asks you to enter a PIN. I believe it's like parental control.
Oh.
I still
you
use
parental
it for me.
control yourself.
Yes, I do. Because, you get sucked in and you just keep looking and looking. And that's one where...
Especially on TikTok, because they purposefully make it so you can't see the time.
I know, and all the music and like so many great videos. Okay, some of them are train wrecks, but there's a lot of great content on there. So
many.
I've learned, at least for me, number one, I don't look at TikTok in the morning. Oh my gosh, no. But even if I did, maybe I'm having breakfast when I actually look at it. So I've already created at that point. I have it locked down after an hour. And once that limit comes on, again, you can override it, but then you have to make that conscious decision. Am I going to watch more than an hour? And what value does it bring?
Yeah, exactly.
And are you really learning anything, or is it just entertainment?
That's true. I think it was a Tim Ferriss quote that I was reading. I believe it was from 4 Hour Work Week, where he was talking about like the biggest waste of time is when you're not actively being productive or not actively resting. It's that limbo in between, which I feel like, and it's not always like scrolling social media. It might be, at least for me, like, okay, if I'm kind of watching a movie or if I'm any point where you're kind of half there. And I think we all know that feeling where you're like, all right, this is my enjoying, relaxing time, but your brain is actually worried about all the things you're not doing. And that can be, and that can be so like difficult to manage because you're never fully present. And especially from the Tim Ferriss quote perspective, like you're never fully resting. So you're not getting that rejuvenation, that energy boost that you need to be productive again. Or if you're being productive, but completely drained, like, no, listen to your body, listen to your mind, and like actually rest. Because if you're doing something in 3 hours that could have only taken you an hour, that's a waste of your time.
It is. And you're not fully focusing either on anything.
Yeah.
So at the end of it, you're like, 3 hours past, what did I
and just not satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go back to the entertainment and the infinite scrolling or
Right.
binge watching, and you still don't feel satisfied.
Right.
So it's almost like make an election, to choose what action you're going to take. Like actively choose what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, to bring it full circle of this, you want to actively choose to create before you open that phone up.
Right.
And before you start looking at things. And like we're talking about, it doesn't have to be anything big. You don't have to make your next, Mona Lisa on your nightstand.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything like that, but it could be an entry. Again, nobody has to see it. It doesn't have to get posted on Facebook or Instagram or anything, just for you. But do that first. Set your intentions for the day without going too woo, but just kind of set your own tone before someone else does it for you.
Right. And I think even like aside from social media, aside from digital, like even outside influences too, when you're really diving into your studio, like, yes, there's something to be said about like looking at other professionals that maybe aspirationally you want to be at their level, or like the old masters, or like studying art history. I am definitely a proponent for that. Like, that's great. But if you're constantly comparing yourself, or like you think that you are easily pushed in a direction that you feel like you should be going in, and it's not true to what you want to be doing, whether it's a style, whether it's a color scheme, whether it's a scale, then you're too easily influenced by other professionals or other artists, then trust like your own thoughts and your own inclinations as to how you want to create before opening up the art history book and saying, well, so-and-so told me I have to do this. Yes, you can learn skills. Yes, you can refine them. But I think there's also a magic of really just trusting your own gut and also just experimenting and playing. And that's the best way that we learn, because you can, I mean, overanalysis paralysis is, I think, such a killer for so many of us.
Especially the creative process.
Right. Like, oh, I'm not perfect at this process yet. I can't even start an art piece using this style. Be like, well, in all the time you're doing research or over contemplating how you should do it or the details or the logistics, you could have made 6 different pieces that progressively got better, and you learn better through those experiences anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's before opening the book or, the infinite scrolling, etc. It's let that pure, just freshly waking up in the morning, even if you're groggy and like training yourself to get your first cup of joe or frappuccino or whatever you're into, tea, etc. Pre-workout. Before, you go down there, just kind of try to be like, okay, let me just get something out of me before something else sets the tone for me.
Yeah.
And then definitely, like you were saying, instead of looking at somebody else's, you can always reference things later, etc., and kind of get inspiration or get ideas or look at techniques. But that very first, essence of create before you consume, just try to see what comes out of you. It doesn't have to look great.
Yeah.
It just needs to be you.
I think that's the big thing too, of like trusting your own instincts and not having expectations about what you're making.
Exactly.
And that's like one motto that once I started implementing that in my creative practice last year, of like no excuses, but also no expectations. Where it's like, okay, I'm going to do one drawing every single day for the entire year. Some days I might sit down and draw for an hour and a half and it's super complex and I develop into a larger piece. Some days I'm like, it's a circle. That's all I have. That's my creative output. Super profound and perfect, I know. And it's like a lopsided circle, even though I still use a stencil. It's pretty like impressive how terrible some of the drawings were. But then on the other side, when you're feeling it, you're feeling it. And so not having any excuses, but not having expectations, like a very liberating part of it.
Yeah. And definitely with the excuses, that's what we brought up to earlier. Almost anybody can wake up 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot. Like I said, like we're talking about, you just let it out, let something out, genuine, just yours.
Yeah.
Freshly woken up, just let something out. It doesn't have to be 3 pages, 10 pages. It literally can just be like, like Jackie would say, just a lopsided circle. Okay, fine. 2 dots and a smile and you're done.
Right. Because that's how it starts. And I think really creating that like habit and routine is huge for both of us.
Yeah, it is.
Of like, okay, no expectations. It might just be, I'm going to draw a circle every day this week. And then one day you might get a little bit more complex. Okay, one day you might decide to shade the circle into a sphere, or like just establishing that practice and that discipline is what is the foundation for any creative practice.
What's the saying? Practice makes better.
There you go. Practice doesn't make perfect.
It will never
Practice
make perfect, but it will always make better.
Sure.
Because perfect is a moving target anyways, and you're never going to reach it.
I'm going to reference a lot of quotes on this podcast series.
Yes, we are.
Another one of my favorite quotes, you guys can't see it, but in my studio, I always had Post-it notes with quotes literally everywhere. From books, from podcasts, from anything. Just Post-it notes. They are my favorite. It's not very good for the environment. I'm working on it. But
they're biodegradable. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's paper.
Now they're plastered all over my walls. I don't know. But they're organized though, so it's fine.
fine.
But one of my favorite quotes that I've also heard this past year was, perfect is the lowest expectation you can hold for yourself because it's unobtainable.
You said that in this one. I don't know who said it, but it said perfect is the enemy of done.
It's true. Because even if you...
Perfect can just be an excuse anyways.
Right.
Well, I'm a perfectionist, so...
You're like, no.
Then you never completed. Just do it. see what happens, throw it till it sticks.
Yeah.
They have a plan to, right? Evaluate
But
and see
learn
how
from
it went.
it. Yeah.
Learn from it and then
Evolve.
do it again. Reiterate. Yeah. Like, did you think Da Vinci did, all his wonderful, masterful works the first time? No.
Probably.
Oh, please. He probably did it like thousands of times.
Yeah.
Thousands of times.
Sketches and backward sketches.
Yeah, there's like a saying, it takes 10,000 hours to master anything.
Oh, yeah.
Practice, practice, practice.
Right. And I think, again, that comes to discipline. It doesn't have to be the same scale. It doesn't have to be the same drawing or design itself, but having that consistent discipline. And especially prioritizing that before consuming the content of others.
Exactly.
What an amazing conversation. I love that even so many years later, there are so many gems in there that still apply.
Yeah, it's crazy how that concept of create before you consume is still relevant. And honestly, even more so, I think, where we are in our businesses and for our listeners in the age of social media and increased digital content, especially as we're leveling up our creative businesses and moving along our art journey, it really does take that discipline and focus and creating before you consume the content of others. So definitely a good reminder.
I know. It's easy to just grab the phone and start scrolling before grabbing a piece of paper and a pencil. So, anyways, I hope this episode had good reminders for you. And with that, we hope you enjoyed listening to this flashback episode number 2, in honor of episode 200.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's episode notes, where you can find links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at Mayart across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.